Think forward. Think Research Channel.
And hello, welcome back to See You at USC. My name is Laura Berman, and I'm here with Libby Clearfield and Bradford Anderson. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, just start off by telling us a bit about your experience of being in Manhattan during the 9/11 attacks. Would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, I was a senior at NYU. Libby may have a similar story. And it was during the morning, one of our friends called me. I'm not sure how she got through. I didn't have classes that morning, or either that or I was skipping them. And so I woke with a phone call, and we were living around 14th Street and First Avenue. So she woke me up with a phone call. I turned on the TV and realized that what was on the TV was pretty much out my window. And so the day kind of was a frenzy after that. Roommates, friends kind of all gathered together. We had a hospital across the street from where we lived. All of us kind of had that feeling, what do we do?
Right.
So everyone kind of just got into the street, tried to line up to give blood, but everyone had the same idea. And so it was just kind of, what do we do now? And so trying to find productive things to do, but also kind of just making sure everyone was together and kind of just being happy in the fact that we were. So that was the day specifically, yeah.
How about for you?
Somewhat similar. I was at my apartment as well, which was not far from Brad's place, and I was also a senior at NYU. And I remember I was sleeping, and I was right across the street from that Beth Israel hospital, and I remember just hearing a ton of sirens, and I really didn't think it was anything too out of the ordinary because I lived across the street from a hospital. So I just kept hitting the snooze alarm and kept trying to go back to bed, and then there was this incessant ringing on the phone, and again, I'm not exactly sure how someone was able to get through because a lot of people weren't, but it was my roommate's father, and he was just calling to tell me to make sure his daughter was okay. And I was like, why wouldn't she be okay? And that was how I found out, which is kind of embarrassing that I was right there in the middle of the city and didn't know until it was on TV to see. But then stepping outside of my apartment and looking down south and just seeing this massive cloud of smoke, it was horrifying.
Well, like you said, your immediate thought was, well, why wouldn't she be okay? Like, has that had any long-term effects on you? Do you think differently now than you did before? Do you feel a different lack of security than you did before the 9/11 attacks?
Well, immediately after, just getting on the subway was tough. I mean, just walking around the streets when everyone had, masks covering their face, I remember that being horrifying. Just visions of things that we had seen through the news over the years were actually, upon us now. And it stayed with me as long as I was in New York, just those ideas of, and when everyone started talking about the dangers of being underground, being in the subway, and every time they'd raise the terror level, that stayed with you. And especially for me, it really hit me when I was underground, because it seemed like the most vulnerable place. And so it definitely stayed with me. And I feel somewhat safer in my car in LA. Yeah.
Right. What about now, 5 years later? The LA Times this morning said that their studies have shown that there's been no lasting effect on people. People have already, to a degree, forgotten what it was like that first week, what it was like when the U.S. had a terror attack. It's something we think of with other countries. Just briefly, has that been your experience with people that you know who weren't in New York? And what about now for both of you?
I certainly hope that is not the case, because for me it is still very much a part of, it's right at the forefront of my consciousness, and I am so aware of that as being part of my past, and I would really like to think that it has greater ramifications than maybe the LA Times is giving it credit for. I don't know. For me personally, I was very sort of in my own world and in my own bubble of school and my own life in New York City, and it made me much more aware of not only of what was going on outside of the world, but in keeping up with the news and with current events. Because I have to be honest, I really didn't know much about Al-Qaeda or any kind of terrorist organizations, Hamas or whatever that has come up in more recent years. But I definitely have a lot more of an awareness of that now.
How about you, Brad?
I don't necessarily see that on an everyday basis. Well, I mean, I guess no one talks. I mean, it's not the subject of conversation all the time. But
sure.
It seems to me that the way a lot of people just viewed it was something that they were detached from. The people that were outside of New York, when it happened, the moment it happened, everyone outside of New York seemed to take more of an issue with it than the people. Not that's the wrong word, but people outside of New York felt like they needed to have a reaction, where the people in New York were actually just dealing with it. Mm-hmm. So, but now I think the people in New York still, everyone has an experience, be it a simple experience or a much more horrifying experience. And so, but I'm curious about the people that weren't in New York, what stays with them? It was something that they saw in the news, and it was something that they witnessed from afar, but in their daily lives, what changed that day for them? And so, I'm not sure if it would have stayed with them as much as if it would have stayed with us. I'm not sure. So the LA Times could be right. Who knows?
Well, I'm hoping also that it wasn't right. I mean, for sure, when you were in New York that day, every New Yorker knows where they were that day and what they were doing when they got that phone call or saw the smoke or smelled it for the following few months. But as far as your daily life goes, are you all afraid to travel? Has it affected anything like that, or have you guys remained pretty?
It has an impact. If anything, it's done the opposite. I've gotten more of a desire to travel and more of a desire to see the rest of the world that's out there. I spent 2 years living in Israel as a result of it, in some ways.
That's great to hear. And you, Brad?
It stays with me whenever I am in an airport, whenever I'm doing air travel. It's in my consciousness, but it doesn't. I don't think it's held me back from doing anything that I would have done before. It hasn't widened my eyes to things that are beyond that. I don't get I don't look at things and get scared all the time. But
well, that's important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both very much for being here. It was very eye-opening. Join us. We'll be back here with two members of Create here at CU at USC, the best college talk show on television. Hello and welcome back to CU at USC. Just to let you know, if you would like to contact us, you can reach us at 213-743-2741, or you can email us at cu@trojanvision.com, or check us out on the web 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year at www.trojanvision.com. I'm here now with Errol Southers and Terry O'Sullivan, two members of USC's Create. For those of our students who are unfamiliar with what Create is all about, would you mind just explaining in your own words what the goals of Create are and how it came to be at USC?
Do you want to, shall I? Create is a grant-funded research program, funded by the Department of Homeland Security, and it was created, as the case may be, about 2 years ago, and was the result of a very competitive process in which DHS took proposals and went around and visited sites. And there were 22 different entities, consortia that applied for it, and we were chosen as number one. But we work for USC, and we are in a sense the equivalent of in the National Science Foundation that has a centers program as well, and we're kind of like that except for Homeland Security.
Excellent. And what made USC stand out when they were looking at all of these different locations around the country? What brought USC to the forefront?
It's a good question. Actually, according to DHS, whose word we have to take on this, they liked the fact that we didn't say that what we could do, what we were going to do, but they said what we could do, what our potential was. Because we essentially brought together a very interdisciplinary coalition of people from earthquake science and risk management and economics and psychology and social sciences and so forth, and said we have these capabilities. And I think a lot of the other places pretty much were much more specific about what they planned to do.
I understand. How did the two of you come to be involved in CREATE specifically?
We go back a few years. Terry audited my class several years ago. I teach in a master's program in the School of Policy Planning and Development. I teach a course in Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Public Policy, and he was a doctoral student at the time. And I kind of like to think the fact that he was in my class because he's a bioterror expert and he knows all kinds of things that can make your skin fall off. But in any event, he audited my class, and I worked in the governor's office for the last 2 years. I was the deputy director for critical infrastructure protection, and came to CREATE actually because we needed some help. Well, we had a list of assets, critical infrastructure sites in the state that we needed to prioritize in terms of resource allocation by way of grant funding. So we went to Dr. Van Winterfeld and asked him, since we have the largest list of critical infrastructure sites in the United States, we really needed a way to model them scientifically so we could make some appropriate decisions with regards to what kinds of grant funding would harden these sites and reduce the risk.
Wow. And how about you? How did you come to CREATE?
Very indirectly, even less direct than Errol, actually. I was in an international relations program that had been done a thesis, doctoral thesis on catastrophic infectious disease outbreaks, including bioterrorism, and had also studied security studies and public health and so forth. So about less than a year after I finished my doctoral studies, the CREATE stood up, and it was a wonderful coincidence. But I was brought on as a risk analyst, and but my public health interest and interest in disasters and infectious disease goes way back. But got a far broader portfolio now. But that was kind of the indirect way.
Well, Homeland Security seems so broad. How do you go about prioritizing what needs attention first and sort of tackling this gigantic issue that's become very relevant, especially recently?
Well, critical infrastructure is divided into 17 sectors. There's something called the National Asset Database. 3 years ago, the president tasked the entire country with identifying those locations in their respective states to put them on this list. And what we are going to be doing is looking at 3 different areas. We look at threat, the probability of you being attacked, vulnerability, the likelihood of a successful attack, and in consequence, those kinds of things that occur if the attack is successful. And so those are the elements we look at in terms of prioritizing sites with regards to how we might want to harden them and devote the appropriate resources to them.
Now, when you find out that a place is at high risk, is this something that you notify the public there about, or would that just frighten them, or how do you go about preparing for these kinds of things without scaring people unnecessarily?
Well, one of the things we're very careful about doing is we don't rank locations.
Okay.
And we have to, as has been said in the Times today and is always said, we'll never be 100% secure. Most of these facilities have security assessments that have been done. They understand their vulnerabilities. It's not a situation where we want to make them more alarmed about it or the public more alarmed about it, but more importantly, how can we address those vulnerabilities in an all hazards approach so it's safer, or I should say with less risk as opposed to terrorism or earthquakes or floods or fires. How can we harden that site so those kinds of things may not occur, and if they do, the consequences are not as devastating.
And if I may add, one of the things that we do, CREATE stands for the Center for Risk and Economic Analysis of Terrorism Events, but particularly since Hurricane Katrina, as the whole country has, we've shifted as well into the direction of natural hazards. What in addition to terrorism can be needs to be analyzed, and this is really where one of our strengths is. That one of the central pillars of the DHS agenda and the national agenda is comparative risk analysis. And essentially that means that you really have to find some way of weighing apples and oranges in terms of risk. Hurricanes, I like to say Osama versus Katrina. It really is essentially anything from hurricanes to terrorism, and the state of California, needless to say, it could be argued that earthquakes are actually potentially maybe even a greater hazard than catastrophic terrorism, at least in terms of the possible impact. But be that as it may, we have to account for all of these things when looking at public allocations, and that's one of the things that we specialize in, that the CREATE Center does.
How do you go about collecting all of the information that you need to know the information to make these kinds of decisions?
This is largely due to a partnership between us, the state, the federal government, and most importantly, the local entities, law enforcement, emergency services personnel. We like to call them first preventers. Those are the folks that are out there that know their jurisdictions, know those sites, know those site owners, so we don't ever get in the way of that relationship between them and their first preventers. They know what's there, they understand those vulnerabilities. As I mentioned before, a lot of these locations are mandated by regulatory statutes that require they perform security assessments anyway. So they know what's there, and it's just a matter then of getting those assessments done, getting that material together, and as Terry mentioned, apples and oranges. How do you compare a dam to a chemical plant
Right.
to an electric grid?
All right. Well, we'll have more on this subject. Join us again with See You at USC. We'll be right back. Hi there, and welcome back to See You at USC. I'm here talking with Errol Southers and Terry O'Sullivan, members of CREATE. Can you tell us a bit about the current projects that CREATE is working on right now?
Well, I'm the Associate Director for Educational Programs. We have a Master of Science in System Safety and Security, largely out of the School of Engineering. We have a certificate program in System Safety and Security, and also an aviation program in safety and security as well. One of the things we're looking forward to in the future is developing an International Institute for Counterterrorism, where we will have an executive education program that reaches out to participants from all over the world and invites lecturers and presenters from all over the world.
Wow.
So that we can have an executive management program for a counterterrorism component in the United States. To my knowledge, no one's doing that. There's one other comparable institution, I should say, a superior institution in Herzliya, Israel, that's being run, and we'd like to model our site after what they're doing there. So those are things we have on the horizon.
Wow.
Absolutely. And actually, in addition to that, but wait, there's more. We have actually another 22 unique research programs actually that are ongoing. We, as the rest of the other centers in the country, are interdisciplinary and also interinstitutional. A lot of different universities and researchers have come together under the auspices of CREATE. But the framework that we have used since we came into being is to look at certain issue areas. We're trying to create tools to do research to be able to solve some of these very difficult and complex problems. But the other way we do it is to look at case studies. And in the first year we looked at threats to aviation, particularly from shoulder-fired missiles, threats to the electrical grid, and hypothetical dirty bomb threat in the port of Los Angeles. Second year we've looked at, we're looking at bioterrorism, the allocation of federal funding to state for state counterterrorism, and port security and border security. But we have so much more beyond that, and it really ranges everywhere from very policy-oriented, specific, problem-specific, and even site-specific issues to some very theoretical mathematics and very abstract types of tools that can be used at some point to analyze these problems.
Wow. Now, for students who are very interested in this subject, what do you think it takes to succeed in this field if you want to help people in this way?
Well, first, terrorism is a very interdisciplinary subject. There isn't a science that terrorism doesn't touch. Political science, sociology, engineering, biology, chemistry. So this is an industry, if you will, this is a career path, if you will, that's never going to go away. The terrorist threat is always going to exist. We were very, very fortunate for many decades, if not centuries, to not have been touched personally by it, but now our lives have changed as well. So anybody who's interested, I would say you're going to find people that are in national security and Homeland Security today that 5-6 years ago may have been doing something very different, but because now their industry is engaged in it, they're going to be growing with us. So I would say that it's unlimited in terms of someone who is looking at this as a career path. Whatever they're doing now, just stay interested, focused on what they want to do. I guarantee you there's going to be some way it will touch Homeland Security, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah. And again, as we were talking earlier about this, there really is hardly a discipline or an area of study that's not affected. And it really ranges everywhere, certainly from the technical side, the sciences and engineering and mathematics, but to the behavioral side, social sciences, organizational management issues, psychology. A huge component of psychology is terror is psychology rather, and how people behave both beforehand, what might motivate them to be a terrorist, but also how does the public react and how do social institutions react and political institutions react. As we saw in Katrina, there was tremendous disruption of both people's psyches, but the government and services in general. So it really does cover, and I would argue also even in the humanities, there's a relevance to all of this. There is a certain poetic philosophical aspect to all of this that is critical to how society reacts to it.
Sure. For students who maybe they're still an undergrad, they can't, enroll in the master's program, are there ways for students to help out with CREATE on their own? Are there opportunities for student involvement?
Take Errol's class.
It's an elective right now, and I do have folks that are in there from a multitude of disciplines. And we go from a definition of terrorism all the way to civil liberties that may be affected by Homeland Security and the Patriot Act. So this course is one of several that's going to be offered in the future. And most institutions across the country now, both at the community college level, university level, are offering some courses in Homeland Security. It's a growing field.
Absolutely. And right now, specifically at CREATE, we have graduate students and undergraduate students that work for us in various capacities, everything from work study to specific research areas. Come in maybe for a few weeks or a few months. Others have been with us from the beginning. So and the opportunities are expanding. Basically, you can work with any number of researchers that may be in your department who are associated with CREATE, for instance.
Excellent. And looking towards the future, I know you mentioned some of the projects that CREATE has been working on in the past couple years. What are you looking to work on in the future?
Well, I know that one of the things we're going to continue to be working on cross-sectoral analysis in terms of how to look at sites in an apples-to-apples way. It's very challenging. There's a lot of money being devoted to Homeland Security. It is certainly the cause of a lot of discussion about what might be deemed waste. So as we ramp up and develop more scientific modeling tools, we'll be able to better justify why a certain amount of money goes to a site to harden it as opposed to something else. Sometimes it's not the largest bridge that should get the most money or the largest chemical plant that should get the most money. The consequence may be a plant that isn't even on your radar screen, that if there were a problem there and a plume that developed, the devastation could be insurmountable. So those are the kinds of things that we'll be doing in the future, is trying to look at cross-sectoral. How do we compare infrastructure from different sectors so that they're on an even playing field?
Yep. And I think the biggest nut to crack here is the comparative issue in general, that Homeland Security is going to be any number of threats, and to try to figure out how to weigh the possible economic and social and direct impact with among the various and sundry issues. Again, Katrina versus Osama.
Well, it's lots of food for thought. Thank you both for being with us today. Everyone, this was Errol Southers and Terry O'Sullivan. Join us next time again for See You at USC, the best college talk show on television. Thank you for being with us today. Did you have a good time?